to Dave and the guys for accepting the talk, inviting us to come out. I'm speaking today. John Cran, who's also with BugCrowd, will be speaking tomorrow and diving into some of the juicy data and things that we see coming off the programs that we've run. Talk today is about how building a better hacker accidentally built a better defender. So the title of it's Welcome to the Blue Team, and we'll dive right into it. So my name's Casey Ellis, just another blonde Aussie hacker. That's a Julian Assange reference, which I need to point out sometimes, and yeah, that's the way that is. Basically, how I got here is I started life as an engineer, got married, and my wife said, hey, you should go try talking to clients and actually doing some of the more businessy type stuff. So I did that for a while, got bitten by the entrepreneur bug, ran a consultancy in Australia, and then this whole BugCrowd thing happened about 18 months ago, and yeah, that's been a bit of a roller coaster, but a very fun one. So we're now living in San Francisco, relocated from Sydney, Australia, with 4 or 5 of the team, and yeah, founder and CEO of BugCrowd. Before we dive right into it, what I want to try to do with this talk is, bug bounties are kind of the new hotness in terms of, the profile and the PR that's going on around them. There's a lot of companies that are starting up. There's a lot of opinions and a lot of definitely press attention and so on that's going into them. Part of this talk is to try to introduce a new way of thinking about this whole idea of launching a bug bounty or a responsible disclosure program in your organization. So that's what we're trying to do here. The let's be real comment, some of these things you guys will have already figured out. So I'm going to talk about problems between the development teams and the engineering teams and security people. But I think a lot of folks have the kinds of issues that I'll bring up. And just from where I'm coming from, so I can code, but I definitely don't consider myself a developer or an engineer. My background's 100% breaker, fixer, solution kind of guy. So that's the angle that I'm approaching this from. But really what this talk is about is how to enable your business and really make everyone in here's job easier in doing that. So BugCrowd, we've got now, I think it's 11,600 people registered on the platform. And one of the big mantras that we've got around the office is build a better hacker. Like, how do we get people who are just getting into this space? We've got folks on there that are extremely good, but there's this spectrum of skill. And there's all these new kids coming out of dev and sysadmin worlds and things like that. And one of the things that we're really focused on doing is how to actually get them better at what they do, have them educate each other and so on. The reason for the title of the talk is, we were focused on that right from day dot. But what we noticed when we started launching these programs, the reality of what can happen if you introduce a vulnerability into your platform or your environment is completely different if you're a platform engineer, when you're having that vulnerability pointed out by some kid in Russia that you've never met before, doesn't know the things you know, and so on. So we accidentally built a better defender, and it's kind of a benefit that we weren't anticipating, but when we saw it consistently happening, it was quite welcome. So who in here is a breaker? It's like pen tester. Yeah? Who here is a fixer, a defender on the back end of stuff? Who tries to do both? I feel sorry for you. I've been in that position myself. It's an interesting one. A lot of these talks, I think, are about, how do we get the business to listen? Why won't they listen to us? But I think the thing, if you step back from it, the people that are breakers and the people that are building, they're actually, you're very different, and it's the competitive tension, it's the fact that you're completely focused on opposite things that actually is necessary and vital for making that relationship work, and that's what makes it valuable. We don't want to change that. Obviously, there's a lot of challenges around how we execute that. You hear a lot of people up on platforms and talks like this saying, nasty things about how hard it is to get traction around security changes that need to happen within an organization. But the fact is, they're running ahead doing their thing. We're here to stop them doing something stupid. The tension in that relationship is a part of what makes it work. So we're paid to do exactly the opposite thing, right? If you think about it from a company's perspective, they're there to make a product, make that a product available to their customers, and then as security people, we try to stop them from doing anything dumb. But at the end of the day, if there's no money coming into the company from revenue from the product and all these other things, then there's no jobs for anyone. So when you look at the priority, it's not really that big a surprise that that's how it kind of works. So here's some of the problem statements that I'll go through. I've preempted a little bit of it here, but we'll take it through with the slides. So you think about writing code or building out a platform from the perspective of a developer, right? You've got a job to do, you've got a product, you've got a boss who's established KPIs around what you're doing, and they're saying, we need this feature to push into production by this date, and that is your job. That is how we assess the quality of what you're doing. That's how we assess the value of what you're doing, what we're actually paying you for, whether you get to stay employed and so on, right? That's what they're doing. Push this feature by this deadline because whatever the reason might be, and there's thousands of them. For security guys, the incentive is, okay, let's stop them from doing anything dumb. Let's make sure that if there's anything that's going into that, if there's patterns that we're seeing, that we can actually change the behavior around to prevent things from happening that might cause a security consequence, let's do that. And then on the backside of that, if that fails and something happens anyway, let's try to identify it before the bad guys do and something bad happens. The thing I think that's really important to keep in mind as a security person, one of our advisors just threw this out as a side note in a conference that he spoke at probably 4 years ago. And it just completely changed the way I think about it. Like, if you think like a bad guy, you think like an attacker, I think the tendency is that we think that everyone else thinks like that as well. So yeah, okay, I'm thinking about how to exploit this, how to pick this lock, how to get in behind this door, whatever it is. We're naturally wired up to solve problems in a way that involves, creatively overcoming whatever limitations there are in front of us. It's kind of, the definition of hacking, really. But most people don't think like that. And I think, when you grab that thought and just sit with it for a second, it actually starts to make sense. But unless you do deliberately think about it, it's one of those things that's a little bit unintuitive. This doesn't make security people better. I think oftentimes one of the things that trips security folks up when they're trying to get a good outcome is that there's almost this superiority that can come across in the tone of the conversations. Sometimes it's intentional. I think a lot of the time it's actually not. It's just how it's received. But, we're doing our thing, they're doing their thing, and that's how it works, right? It does make us very useful. And I think, just to kind of drive that point home a little bit, if you're ever, I've done this, right? And so this is me talking to myself in the past as well. If you're ever tempted to call a platform engineer or a developer dumb for writing a bug into code, like, build and launch a product first and then go back and have that conversation with them. Because what they're doing to make this stuff work as well as making it secure is actually not that trivial a task. And I think we all know that, but, the frustrations of the job can have that stuff come out anyway, right? So then you've got this problem. So there's all of these things that these security people are asking me to do. There's best practice. There's finding out these vulnerabilities and remediating them, all these, all this stuff that we throw at them to try to get them to do their job in a manner that's more secure. But ultimately it slows them down because they're trying to push the feature by the date because dollar reason, whatever it is. Which means we have this problem, like, why aren't they taking me seriously? This is a bug. This is a bad practice. This is something that I'm seeing within the organization that is clearly going to cause a bad impact for you. Like, why aren't you listening to me? Why won't you actually make a change? And I touched on this before. Development and engineering, it's building the products that are keeping the lights on for whoever you're employed by to get this work done, right? No development means no product, which means no money, which means no job for anyone. So you can understand why the prioritization of getting features out sits way higher up on the stack than actually making them secure, unfortunately. This is the real problem, I think. They don't actually believe that the boogeyman's real. So they hear all of these stories about, what happens to code when bad people get at it and there's flaws in there. They hear about all these things of how they can maybe potentially improve that. But at the end of the day, the threat of an actual attack is this ephemeral kind of thing that's out there that maybe won't happen, maybe it will, we're not really sure, but if it's between that and getting this feature out before my boss kicks me in the pants, then I'm going to choose the latter, right? And then for us, I don't have the time, energy, skill, people skills, sometimes resources to actually convince you that the boogeyman's real. And we'd like to thank all of the security vendors ever for making this problem hard, right? So we go out there and tell them what these issues are. We try to get them to agree with it. You know, that's a story that's being told by a lot of people to sell their stuff, and it's being told for a lot of reasons as well. If FUD actually works, I've had a lot of conversations over the past couple of days here. It's been a bit of a theme of chats, which has been interesting. But the idea that FUD, in the sense of going out and saying, hey, listen, the sky is falling, like you need to pay attention to what's going on, you know, it gets a lot of bad press, and I definitely don't advocate that being the only way you educate people about security risks. But if the starting point is just not doing anything about it whatsoever, or not being cognizant of it whatsoever, it's the most effective way to get started. The problem is that you know, you hit someone with that stick too many times and they become quite immune to it. So here's what they're doing. You know, we've got checklists, we've got testing, we've got CI, we've got all these different things that are going into making sure that this code's secure before it hits production. There's all of the outsourced stuff. You bring consultants in, you build out your team, and all these different things. Going back to what I was saying before, if your job as an engineer is to get a product that does what it's meant to do out to market, these things are all blockers. Like they're all going to slow you down to some extent, and we can do a lot of stuff to make it more efficient. I think CI code scanning, for example, is one of those things that's becoming, you know, less of a blocker in terms of the impact it has on actually pushing something out, but it's still something that's going to slow them down, right? So what do we do as security people? Here's the token Australian slide. And to be honest, it's kind of fun, right? Yeah. That's it. That's how it is. If we're going out there and saying, hey, listen, you're standing at the edge of a lake, I don't think you realize that someone, thanks to John Cran, ladies and gentlemen. The thing I like best about this slide is the emu that walks in at the end, just in case you didn't realize it was in Australia. What the hell's the emu doing there? So, you know, whatever. So that's what we do. We go out there and we say, hey, let's kick you down the stairs, have a bit of a laugh. Hopefully you'll become more aware of the fact that this is something that you should actually be thinking about. It doesn't work over the long term. Same thing as what I was saying before. Like, you hit people with a stick, eventually they stop caring about the fact that you're hitting them with a stick. So here's the question. How do we get developers to believe in the boogeyman? Because if it's currently an annoying checklist, if it's currently a bunch of things that are going to slow them down, pivoting that as the strategy for getting them to actually care about this stuff to the point where it's actually a nascent awareness of the threat that doesn't become all they do, because they have to still push products, right? But it's like they're aware of the fact that there is a real threat, and if they make mistakes, real bad things are potentially possible. This is not a Picard quote. It totally should be, right? The most efficient way to get something the attention it deserves is to set it on fire. I do this a lot, and it's very effective. You know, the idea is, okay, here is this problem. It's not getting addressed. All right, how do we make it worse? How do we actually draw the attention around this problem, you know, to the point where something's happening around it to actually make it better? Set it on fire. Actually make it worse. The reason this guy's lighting his cigar with a Benjamin is because he basically built his business off that principle, right? The most effective, like the most security aware a company's ever going to be is directly after it's just been breached. And this is also not a John McAfee quote, but as I said, he's burning money because it's true. So some examples. So Heartland, the Heartland breach. I was working in payment card security at the time. That was a huge deal, right? But then a year later, Heartland are known as the leaders, the pioneers, the people that are thought leading in the market around end-to-end encryption for PCI. They teamed up with Voltage and did all the different things. That was in direct response to the fact that they got their asses handed to them by hackers, right? They paid attention, they made some changes, and they actually turned it into a win, which is, you know, equal parts awesome and I think a little bit frustrating, but it worked. And then Target gets a new CISO after their breach. Obviously, they got completely owned and they fired the CEO as a result, but same thing, right? We now believe that the boogeyman is real. Let's do something about it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are lots of examples of this. So that's nice. Great. Thank you for the Thank you for the encouraging tips on how to get my company to care about security. How do I do it without getting on the front page of the Wall Street Journal? Because that kind of sucks. We don't really want to have that happen. I want the benefit, but I don't want the drawback. Bug bounties. Responsible disclosure programs and bug bounties. And I'll explain how in a sec. I love Ali Brosh. She's a boss. So, excuse me. I'm going to assume everyone here has either heard of what a bug bounty program is running one, or at least understand what's going on. But I'll touch on it real quick. You open up your infrastructure and you open up permission to your infrastructure and your applications to the research community, and you say, okay, if you find something, tell us what it is. The first to find each unique issue gets paid for that issue after it gets fixed. And generally the model is that the more severe or creative the issues are that come in, the more you pay out for them, right? What BugCrowd does is actually administers these programs. We've got a platform called Crowd Control, which handles all of the management and the admin and stuff like that. The other thing we're doing with it is using the public programs to basically allow researchers to compete and creep up on the leaderboard, rise up into what we call the elite tier, which are the ones that we then deploy for private bug bounty programs where, they're starting, like companies that are starting to understand that the economics of this type of model makes sense, but they don't want to go out and do the TechCrunch article and, the interviews and all of the brouhaha that a lot of the tech companies are doing, which is, to be fair, is a brilliant thing. I think the awareness around this idea and the fact that it's marketable is also a great win. Not all the market's ready for that, so that's why we do the private stuff. In terms of the history, like the first recorded security bug bounty that's out there that we've been able to find was Netscape. They kicked off their program in 1995. They used to give away shirts. It kind of did this for a while, and then it was 2010 when it all kind of exploded. Google launched, it pre-exploded in 2010. I think the awareness of the concept went like this, and then the adoption followed a few years later. Google launched their program. They were very public about it. Facebook launched their program. They're very public about it. And what we've seen since then is a bunch of other companies jump on board, and then companies like BugCrowd starting to spring up to actually facilitate the process and make it efficient and simple. So this is, I touched on this before. It's not just about being loud. It's not about necessarily only being in a position where you're doing something that's seen really by the market as quite a badass thing to do, right? You're going out and saying, hey, hackers, come at us. That's how Joe Consumer views these things. And the reality of it is it's a lot more controlled than that. But if you're a company that wants to actually go out there and position your posture towards security as something that's really up there, they're good for that. And they're also, cheap's the wrong word for it. They're cost efficient. You're paying for results instead of the effort, right? That's not the only reason to do it. It's actually about leveling the playing field out. Like if you think about what the attackers look like, what the attacker space looks like, you've got lots of people, lots of different motivations, lots of time, and their incentive model as a malicious attacker is to actually get the gold. They don't care how much time. They're not getting paid for the hours they're putting into it. They're only rewarded when they actually find something. So this whole bug bounty thing starts to level out that from an economics and a resourcing point of view. And where it fits into what we're talking about today is it also introduces your developers and your engineering teams to guys like this. So this is Igor Homikov, aka the guy who completely owned GitHub that time. He found a bug in Rails, reported it to GitHub. GitHub weren't quite convinced that it was a real issue, so he pushed something into the master branch, at which point they got the message. And he's just done it again recently. So he's a pretty smart kid. The thing with this guy is that he actually wants to help, right? He's got the kind of skills and the kind of intelligence that would make him a very effective and quite efficient criminal, but he doesn't want to be one. He would rather actually participate in these types of programs and also then use the reputation he's building from that to build out his consultancy, which he's done. And the thing going back to what we're talking about with how do you get the company, the business to believe that the boogeyman's actually real, he's great, he's friendly. I wonder what his next door neighbor can do. That's the question that gets asked. You start these things up and all of a sudden you're getting your code hacked by some kid 8,000 miles away that you've never met before. He doesn't sit inside GitHub's organization and see all the things that the developers get to see in terms of architecture and planning and all that kind of other stuff, he's got the same visibility over what they're doing as a normal bad guy would. So when a report comes from Igor and it lands on a developer's desk to fix, it goes from being, oh crap, I've got to fix this bug, to, holy shit, there's someone from outside the four walls of the organization that was able to do this. This is actually a real thing. So you've created an incident without the fuss of an incident. I preempted my next slide. Like having your code owned by a 14-year-old kid. So talking about Mozilla, so we'll get into a couple of case studies and some stories around where we've actually seen this happen, both in bug crowd programs and in programs that are out there on the internet, companies doing it themselves. Excuse me. Jeez, they're going off in there. So Mozilla kicked off their program, and basically this curve that you're seeing here is what we see every time. So there's this assurance debt that companies have when they first do this, because they're applying a greater level of resourcing, a greater level of effort and skill, like across the different people that are doing it, to a problem that already existed. And what happens is you flush out a bunch of stuff that you didn't know was there, right? So there's always a bump at the front end of it. Then you see that tail off as they start to fix things and it stays steady. But then off the back of that, if you look over on the other side, boogeyman belief, right? You actually see the trend start to tail off. And that's as the developers are, like the feedback loop between the researchers that are going at this stuff and thinking the way that the developers don't about the code. That's when that knowledge is starting to transfer in. They're like, okay, these guys are actually teaching us not just how to write secure code, but how a bad guy thinks and what they're capable of if they're coming at us from the outside world. Great success, right? We've done it. We've launched 115 programs so far. We see this pattern every single time. So it's this hump, and then it just sort of settles down, and then they start to get smart as the, and that's generally not the security team that's driving that downturn at that point. It's the developers actually wising up based on what's coming in from the researchers. Another example, this was a fun one. We had a company that we were talking to about potentially starting a program. And at one point, they actually gave us a call and said, listen, we've got this guy from Eastern Europe who has told us he's found an issue. He wants a couple of €1,000 for him to disclose it. So at that point in time, that guy had all of the leverage in that conversation. I've got a bug. I can hack you. You pay me, and then I'll tell you. Not all of it. They could have just decided not to pay for it, right? But, in that situation, the balance of power is a little bit freaky. So they came to us, we said, you know what we should do? We should actually create a private program, invite just this person, but then not tell him that he's the only person on there. So at that point, he's feeling like he's competing with a bunch of other researchers that are potentially going to find the same thing. We started that off, and we got the bug out of the guy in 15 minutes or so. They actually paid him anyway, which I thought was interesting. I thought it was fantastic in that they made the commitment to do that up front and they followed through. And I think integrity is really critical to running one of these things. The fact that he came in the way he did, might have mitigated whether they'd done that or not, but that's how it all played out. And for them, they know now that this is something that happens. Like, this is someone that, okay, we stabilized that situation, we got the bug fixed, and they're now running a program as well. What that did as a knock-on effect is that pretty much the whole company, in terms of the team that was responsible for actually fixing, running this business unit and fixing the problem, they were all aware of it. And then the reaction that we've seen out of them since then is that they believe in the boogeyman now, right? It's a good thing. Great success. Another client, social media company. So the InfoSec team, this is a really interesting one because they wanted to start a program because the security team were having a lot of trouble getting traction from management about changes they needed to make to the way that code was being pushed and all sorts of other things within the organization. So this was actually a proactive thing that the client came to us with. They said, we need some help with this story. We need help selling this story. Can you start a program up, do it in a way that's quite, private and controlled and limited, but do it for the purpose of A, finding out what we don't know in terms of vulnerabilities that are in the platform, But B, and really the main thing, is to actually be able to sell this story up into management about the fact that here's all of the things that the internet was able to find when we asked them to tell us what they were looking for. Because that stuff's happening anyway, right? This is actually engaging in making sure there's a feedback loop there. You know, invoke Picard management mode, set the thing on fire and see what happens. They got budget for another 3 team members, and I think they appointed a CISO after that as well. So that was a good outcome. Great success. So here's an idea if you're thinking about actually doing this. It's something we've actually started to do within BugCrowd, because it's, you know, you're talking about the feedback loop that already exists once you start that conversation. Like, how much tighter can you make that? How much more aware can you make the teams that are cutting this code about what they're doing wrong, potentially what they're doing that's risky and so on, based on, you know, what the researchers are coming in and saying. So the idea is you create a pot, you say, okay, at the end of the quarter, we're going to have a party, here's the budget for that party. By the way, whatever the people that are participating in our bug bounty program take out of this pot, you guys don't get, right? So it's just an interesting way to do it. We've actually, as I said, started doing this internally with a platform that lets companies do that in-house as well. And you can pilot this with internal teams. Like, this is something that we're starting to see people do as well. There's subsets of developers, engineers, whatever, within an organization that, you know, they're not necessarily in the security team, but they're obviously fascinated by this stuff, and they're probably playing around with it when they go home or at work, right? And I'm sure you can all think of people that are in your organization who fit that mold. Run a bug bounty for them. Get them all together and say, okay, you're going to go up against this piece. We're going to actually do this in-house. We're going to have full visibility to the entire organization about how this is running, and start to create that culture of, wow, stuff actually does get hacked if we code it in a way that allows it to. So ready to start. So, you know, the idea is, as I said right up front, getting you guys thinking about this whole idea of disclosure and bug bounty programs from a slightly different angle. Like, use it to help you sell what you're doing to the people that are ultimately, like, it's your job to educate and to have buy what you're selling in terms of your story. You want to make them aware and convinced of the fact that the boogeyman's real, and this security thing is not just something that, you know, you're running around waving your hands about. This is a really good way to do that. So in terms of how to get them started, you know, bug bounties are awesome. I think they're the most incredibly efficient way of finding these vulnerabilities that's going right now. Obviously, I'm a little biased in saying that, but sue me. But the problem with them is, this is what happens when you start them. So you go out there and say, hey, internet, we're going to pay people who find stuff in our code, right? What you'll get is people that are actually genuinely helpful and able to find stuff. Like, you'll get intelligence and information that you can use straight away. But what you'll also get is this kind of thing. There's a lot of people that are getting involved in this type of thing who, they want their name on a Hall of Fame. They want the cash. They're not necessarily that valuable at contributing to your program and to your overall security posture. John's going to talk a lot about this tomorrow in terms of some of the data we've seen around this type of thing. Yeah, the thing with it is that you've got to have that in mind before you start, because if you're only thinking about it 2 or 3 days into your program, you're going to have a bad time. So the golden rule is, if you touch the code, you should pay. If you're putting a commitment out there to say, okay, researchers, if you find here's the criteria, if you find a security issue that falls within this scope, these are the things we're interested in. These are the things we're not interested in. All that kind of stuff. You put that out there, and then you create a reward model around that says, okay, if you do this, then we will do that. The critical thing when you're running a program is to make sure you hold up your end of the bargain, right? Because the minute you even look like you're not doing that, word travels pretty fast about companies that start to, you know, play a bit fast and loose. And there are companies that have done that in the past. So touch the code, pay the bug. Makes sense, right? I think the mistake that everyone makes when they go and start one of these programs is they assume it's going to be all about how do you handle the vulnerability information that comes in. Like, how are we going to feed it off into the dev teams to get it fixed? How are we going to triage it? How are we going to, you know, all of that. And that is a significant piece of the work that goes into it. The bigger piece is actually managing the community. So for every, you know, with BugCrowd programs, and this is actually industry standard across the companies that we've spoken to that run them for themselves as well. It's generally a signal to noise ratio of about 10 to 1. So not 10 to 1, it's about 10% signal to 90% noise. So for every bug that you get in that you need to do something about and that you need to reward, you're going to get another 9 that are either duplicate, they're invalid, they're completely out of scope. Sometimes you get people saying, hey, I scanned your stuff with Nessus, can I have $500? Like, there's stuff like that that goes on. And the interesting thing about it is that's not really adding value to your company. Like, a lot of what we do with Bug Crowd is reducing the cost of that noise. Those things aren't really adding value to your company, but because you've made this commitment to reward people that are trying to help you, you have a responsibility to close off every one of those conversations, right? The overhead of doing that is something that people constantly forget to factor in, and it's really important to do that. Aligning expectations before you engage. Like, what are the terms going to be? What we tend to suggest for companies to do if they're going to launch a public program is you start with your rewards set very low, because to be honest, you don't really know what's going to happen, right? The whole reason you're doing this is to find the unknown unknowns in your system, and the nature of that is that you have probably a fairly good idea of where you're at from a security posture point of view, but you're not 100% certain. And the last thing you want to be, finding yourself in, and like from a position point of view, is scraping for budget because you've set a bounty reward pool too high and you've actually run out of money. There's a few programs running at the moment that you'll see out there where you see researchers complaining, and I'd hazard to guess very strongly that that's the reason that happened. They started too high, they burnt way faster than they thought they would, and now they're at a point where it's like, shit, this is costing a little too much, we have to go back up for budget, let's correct. You don't want to do that after you start, right? You want to start low, move it up, incentivize the behavior you want, and really have a positive relationship with these researchers. So concluding, they're cost effective, they're highly marketable, but that's not the full story. When you get a bug that comes in from outside of the four walls of your company, and it hits the desk of the developer who put it there in the first place, that developer's mind is forever changed in terms of their perspective of, is this security thing something that I should really be concerned about, or is it just this annoying kind of Chicken Little, security people running around saying that I should be concerned about it? It goes from being this external thing to something that's internalized very quickly, and I think that is, if not the best reason, right up there with the really good reasons to start one of these things. Go start one. If you want to have a chat with any of us about how you can do it with our platform, or we're quite happy to give you guys information about how to do it yourselves as well. So we love talking about this stuff, and we're quite happy to do that. Plenty of tips and tricks up on the blog as well. That's blog.bugcrowd.com. Any questions? Zero. Just yell out. It's fine.
I'm just wondering about the legality of this. If you do that and some evil guy does attack you, have you sort of given up the right to punish him? You can say, not participating in your contract.
Yeah, no. Basically the way... Sorry? Yeah, certainly. So the question was, if you start a bug bounty program, are you giving up your right to pursue legally someone who hacks you for real? Is that pretty much what you're saying? Yeah. No, you're not. You do have to structure the legal T's and C's around these programs fairly carefully. We actually open sourced a template for responsible disclosure policies, which is up on our GitHub. And the way we did it was to make it as legally complete as possible to protect the company, but also something that could be read and understood by someone who doesn't have English as a first language, because you got to factor that in as well, right? The way, the typical engagement scenario is that you provide safe harbor to the researcher as long as they basically adhere to the terms you set. So you say, if you make a good faith effort not to mess with our stuff, if you disclose promptly, so on, then we indemnify you and actually permit this behavior. If you move if you move outside of those terms, then that safe harbor is lifted and you're back in the position where you can be pursued if you do something wrong. Yeah. Josh?
Do you ever have a case where people are actually taking jobs? Like, so your bug hunters are being hired into the companies that they're submitting bugs to, the companies are using as their security tools?
Yeah, so the question was, do we ever see researchers getting hired by companies that they're helping, or companies that they're not even helping? Well, that's not really what you asked, but that was kind of the answer. So that's what Josh asked. Yes, is the answer to the question. What we're seeing a lot of is exactly that. So a researcher will target a particular organization for any sorts of, like, there's any number of reasons. It can be the economics. It can be just because they like that platform and they want to go hack on it. And, over time, they develop a relationship with that company and they end up getting a job from it. I think Tesla just made a hire from one of the guys that is a pretty, this is all on the Twitters and things like that, so I'm not saying anything I shouldn't there. From exactly that reason. Like, they launched their program, he came in and did his thing and did it quite effectively, and they've offered him a job. The other thing that we're seeing quite a lot is, I mentioned before, kids, I don't know, for want of a less pejorative way of describing them, like literally 17, 18-year-old students who don't have a career in information security. They use bug bounty programs as their way to start. And these guys are incredibly skilled, but, InfoSec's a hard industry to break into, right? They're actually using that to slipstream themselves in. And for the older folks as well, we're seeing people come in from like development and sysadmin backgrounds. So you get the kind of guys that are, server admins by day. They're up until 3 a.m. on IRC every night, talking to hacker buddies and learning stuff. Then they start engaging with this. DEF CON, actually, I had maybe 3 or 4 different conversations with people that since the last year, since 12 months ago when I spoke to them last, they've actually gotten a job. They've actually entered the industry using this stuff as their, their on-ramp, so to speak. So, yeah, it's pretty cool. Yes? Yeah, so that's a comment. Yeah, so saying that companies are actually using this as an interview tool. And I think it's great. I mean, I believe in certifications and all these other things, but if it's between having your OSCP and going out and actually hacking the company for real, if the outcome that you're after is someone who can do that so that they can help you make your stuff more secure moving forward, it makes sense to do things that way. Yes?
Google has a reward program versus the bounty program. Do you see differences between the two, and are there programs like that that aren't working?
So a difference, sorry.
Google rewards.
Yep.
Versus a straight bounty program. Is there a difference?
No, I mean, Google branded their program as the VRP, so the Vulnerability Reward Program. The mechanics and the economics of it are basically the same as everyone else's program. When you start getting into some of the, like, Pwn to Own and some of those other, like the Chrome bounty and some of the other programs they do, that's the same model but applied to a more specific purpose. So that's starting to, shift it around and have a bit of a play with it. Yes and no, I guess, is the answer to that question. What was the second part again?
Do you see any of those bounty programs that companies have that aren't working when they do something specific that are backfiring?
Yeah, definitely. They always work in terms of finding out stuff that comes in, but we see bounties that fail on the community management side like all the time. And it doesn't happen for our customers because we get in the middle and very actively provide help to them around that, because as I mentioned before, it's one of the things that people just kind of don't really think about when they start, and then all of a sudden their hair's on fire and they have to figure out how to do it retroactively. But yeah, I mean, you get researchers that, for example, feel like they're being ripped off because they've heard this one guy over here found a particular class of vulnerability and got paid this much, and now they're finding the same issue and getting paid a lower amount. Stuff like that. Like, there's some tricks to it to make sure that it, the trick is probably a little bit strong. There's some stuff that's, unintuitive knowledge that you can pick up along the way on how to make that work. But, the too long don't read is be very clear about what you're going to do and just be super consistent. Because these guys, they do all talk. And when there's problems is when that there's basically a failed expectation. There's an expectation that's set that's not carried through. That's the number one reason for these things going south. And also sending out t-shirts can kind of get awkward, but you get that. Yes?
Can I ask if these companies set up like a lock
Yeah, so the question was, do any of the companies that we deal with, or just in general, set up mock sites, so staging, UAT, or just a duplicate of production specifically for the purpose of testing? Yes. In general, if you've got a website or a service that's been sitting out on the internet and it's very highly trafficked, you can generally be pretty confident about the resilience of that system and do this thing on production. But if you're not, and you think about it, if you work for that kind of company, you can say, yeah, that's me. So an example would be Facebook. Another example would be Google, right? But what we do, particularly for the private bounties, is get the customer to set up a mock site, which, as you say, has the data taken out of it and so on. And I've seen a bunch of public programs over the past while where they've actually created a demo environment specifically for the purpose of testing. And that does other things around making sure that, it's not messing up their analytics data, for example, things like that as well. Yes? Yeah. So John's just piling. This is for the demo, for the recording mostly. Yeah, saying that if you do set up a demo environment, make sure that any compromise in that demo environment won't blow back in your production systems. We have seen actually it's happened. It happened in a controlled way, which is really good. But the fact that it was possible was a little scary. We had a customer who spun up some pre-production stuff on AWS for us to test before they pushed it out into prod, and it hooked into their central auth backend. And it turned out there was a bug in the auth backend that one of the researchers identified. So he saw that, he saw the behavior and said, okay, this smells a little funky, but it's also out of scope, and he's one of the guys that is experienced and been with us for a while, so he plays nice. Asked permission to have a look at it, and it turned out there was an issue there. So, there's those types of scenarios. I think if you're going to use crowdsourcing for that type of thing, and if that's any sort of a concern, then actually limiting the number of people that you invite to the program so you can access the economics and multiple skills and all that kind of stuff, but not have the risk downside of having something bad like that happen. Any other questions? Cool. So if you like this shirt, I've got a bunch of them down here. That's not like I've had people coming up and basically trying to crash tackle me to get one over the past little bit. So you guys are all here, so you get first dibs. And thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it.